Hi there, and thanks for joining me. I'm pleased to announce that I've just recently discovered a pretty cool new workaround to eliminate and prevent some of this white fringe that happens when you're using a blender on a layer in Corel Painter. And this white fringe problem has been an issue ever since Painter was created, and they haven't seemed to fix it for some reason. You don't get this fringe in Photoshop or ArtRage or any of the other digital painting programs. You only get it in Painter, and it's pretty well documented in all the forums. A lot of people have really complained about it, and I've spent a lot of time trying different things to fix it. The solutions that Corel provides are not really acceptable for my particular method of painting, so I've been trying to find something that is acceptable for me, and I think I've found it. So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you. So I'm going to hide my title here, and we have an example. In this example here, I have a couple of different layers that are identical to each other. I have this normal layer A and this modified layer B. The normal layer A, if we go to blend it, functions as a layer does normally in Painter. When you blend on a normal layer with a blender or a distortion brush or any of the plugin brushes, you get this white fringe that's added. And it really shouldn't work this way. You shouldn't be getting any white added because I'm trying to blend black with blue and I'm trying to blend with green and red and so on. So there should be no reason for this fringe. There's some ways to fix that. We could set our blend mode to multiply if we're using a dark layer, but the only problem is if we move this multiply layer on top of another layer, it might blend with that in ways that we don't want it to. We can also set the blend mode to gel cover, but that doesn't completely get rid of the fringe. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but for the most part it doesn't work. And it's not a compatible composite method with Photoshop, and I use Photoshop a lot, so these options aren't really acceptable. If we look at this modified layer, this is the one that I've applied my special workaround to. We can blend this layer all we want and even use something more extreme like this coarse oily blender. We can blend from the inside out and from the outside in, and we don't have too much of a problem. We can even use the distorto brush to distort the edges without getting any fringe. Now if we try to do all that stuff with this normal layer, the layer that doesn't have any modifications, then we get some stuff like this, where we'll get this fringe, and I'll have to zoom in for you to be able to see it, but it'll be pretty clear. If we have it set to normal blend mode, we see all this fringe gets added when we use these brushes, especially here on the edges there's some light area. Whereas if we look at example B, there's none of that fringe anywhere, and we're not going to get any for the most part. So again, I'll show you normal layer with no modifications. We get fringe, modified layer, no fringe. Now, the reason that this is working is because I've done a few different things. What I've done is essentially replaced the background of this layer with the background that's in the image, which is this blue, green, and red colored background. Now your background might be multiple layers. That's why I've separated this blue and the green and the red all into separate layers, because I want to show you what you do when you have one layer or when you have multiple layers. So we'll go ahead and get started here. This is going to be a little complicated. I made it much easier by making some custom commands here. And these are just kind of shortcuts that I use, so I can just tap on them real quick rather than having to go to the menu for all these. So I'll go through it really fast the first time, and then I'll go through it in detail the second time. So I'm going to delete my examples here, and delete my notes. Okay, so we've got a background. It's made of multiple layers, and we want to put an object on it, or a layer on it, that we can blend without the edges turning to white. So first thing that we want to do is we want to flatten our background. So anything that's going to be behind the shape that we create, let's say this is going to be our shape, anything that's on layers underneath this needs to be flattened. And if there's foreground objects, that's okay. You could have something in the foreground like this. Let's make a yellow thing that we can see, and we can have something in the foreground. But what's important is that you want to select everything that's behind your object here that you're going to want to apply the effect to. So first thing that we'll do is we want to merge all these background layers. So you can do this two ways. One, if you don't have anything else in the foreground, you can just do a drop all, and that will drop your canvas down to a single layer. Or if you want to just select layers independently, you can hold Shift or Control on your keyboard, and you can select the layers that you want to merge, and then do a Control E to collapse the layers. So we'll do that. We have our background collapsed to a single layer now, and we'll do a Select All. That puts a selection around everything. We do a copy, that copies the selection into memory. Then we want to do 2 undos in a row. 1, 2. We've gone back in time 2 steps to where before we merged these 3 background layers. So now these 3 background layers are separate again because we did 2 undos, but our merged background is still copied into memory. So now if we do a paste in place, what we're going to get is basically a merged copy of those layers. So we have our background on a single layer, but we've also still got all of our background layers independent from each other. So now we want to create a new layer. This will be the layer that we're going to modify so that we can blend it without any fringe. We'll define our layer just by putting something here. You could, just put in a basic shape or shade it or do pretty much whatever you want to it. Anything but blending. And now that we've got that there, we want to do select layer content. So we're putting a selection around what's on this layer here. Then we want to select the background layer that we created and the new layer. So this is this new layer we created and the unified background layer selected together with this selection active. We're going to go to collapse layers. So now we've merged this black dot with the background. So now the background and the black dot are on the same layer, but this selection's still active. Then we're going to go to invert selection. So now we've inverted the selection. So now we're selecting everything surrounding the black dot. Then we'll go to create layer mask. That's going to create a mask for this layer. We'll go to paint bucket and we'll select black, and we will fill our selection or our mask with black. Now what that's going to do is that's going to create a mask, and that mask is going to mask out the whole background for this layer. So it's going to mask out this red, green, and blue background that's here. After we do that, we go to apply layer mask. That applies the layer mask. So it's essentially removed this background and just left this dot here. And then we go to select none. Now this seems really confusing, but essentially what this has done is this has replaced the background of this layer that's floating on its own with this colored background instead of white. Normally it would just have a white background. So if we create a new layer and we make a black dot, it's got a white background. You can't see that it's white, but it is. So if we go to blend, in this invisible white background, we bring in white because we're blending with this white background. What we've done by modifying this other layer, I'll just label it here so we know what it is. If we go to this modified layer here and we blend, we're not blending with white because we've replaced the background with this green, blue, and red background. Now, even though we've thrown it in there and used a mask to erase it, it's still kind of invisibly there. So you have to imagine that when you make a layer here, even though you can't see some things that are on the layer visually, those things might still be there. So you can still have a background on a layer. So it seems really crazy, and I kind of just figured this out by experimenting with a lot of different things. But basically, we're replacing one background with another. The background that was white is getting replaced with the background that we pasted in, and that basically just makes it so that we can blend with a colored background rather than a white one. The one issue is going to be that if you move this modified layer after you've blended it, this is what's going to happen. You'll see that it's blended with the background that's contained on the layer. So if I blended it over here, black to blue, that blue is going to be blended with the black. And if I move it over here to the green, you can see it's blue tinted, and it's blue tinted on the red. And if I move over here, you got this green tint. So what happened is I blended it here, and it picked up these colors in the background because the background is still kind of there. So that avoids the fringe if you're not going to move anything around, which is generally the case, and it more or less fixes the problem. Another issue I see is that if you smudge too far, like you do really, really long smudges like this, you might start to see that you're pulling green over into the red, and then you might see some fringe that way. But usually when I'm doing modifications, they're usually pretty small. They're kind of surrounded more or less within the perimeter of the object that I'm working on here. So I don't really go too far. So this tends to work pretty well, and I think it's a good solution for this fringe problem. So I'm going to go over this one more time without using these shortcuts here so that you can see how to do it. I'm just going to delete these layers, and so we have our background. I'm going to decide that these are going to be the layers, the background layers, and this yellow dot here will be in the foreground, so I won't worry about anything other than what's below that. So I'm going to select all the layers that I want to merge as my background, which are these 3 layers, and I'm going to merge them using Control E, or I can do it down here in this little option in the layers palette, and go to collapse layers. And I've got my collapsed layers here. I'm going to do a select all. I'm going to do edit, copy. So we've copied our merged background into memory. And I'm going to do an edit, undo, and I'm going to do a second edit, undo. So that puts everything back to before I merged the background. My copied merged background is still copied into memory. So we can do an edit, paste in place. And this is our merged background, just to clarify what that is. Next we'll make a new layer, and this will be the layer that we will modify. So let's call it modified layer. And we can go ahead and draw something on it here. So I'm just going to take black and draw a little bit of black on here. Now what we want to do is select layer contents, so we can get to that from the select menu. Select layer content. That puts a selection around whatever's on this layer, which is just this blob. And then we're going to select both the layers that we want to merge together. So we want to merge this black dot with the merged background so that they become a single layer. So we'll select them both using Shift, and then I'm going to collapse the layers by doing Control E or selecting it from this menu here. Now we have our modified layer and our background on a single layer now. So if we turn this layer on and off, you can see these are a single layer. So we've added this background to this layer. However, this selection's still active, so that means that if we want to then remove the background, which basically just means making it invisible, we can do that. So now that we have this selection around this modified layer merged with the background here, we can do invert selection. So we'll do select, invert selection. So that turns our selection inside out. So now our selection is selecting everything around this dot. The next thing that we'll do is we'll create a layer mask. So we'll click here in the bottom of the layers palette to add a new layer mask. That adds a new mask. And then we will select the paint bucket, and we will select black, and we'll fill our mask. Make sure your mask is selected by clicking on it here. We'll fill our mask, which is this background here, with black. Now you can see that the background has disappeared, but it hasn't really gone anywhere. It's visually invisible, but the information is still there. What colors were there are kind of saved in a way. So Painter knows that green was here, and red was here, and blue was here, but it's not going to show them. But if you were to try to blend with them, it would bring them back, because this is now the background on this layer. So what we'll do is we will apply the layer mask. So we can go to Layers, Apply Layer Mask. So that just adds the mask. It basically just cuts out this background, and then we'll do a select none. That removes this little active selection here. And we can turn our background layers back on if we want. I just turned them off for example's sake. You can see that our foreground object's still here. We can move it around anywhere. We have our modified layer here, and we can go ahead and blend it. So let's blend it here, and we see that we're not getting any issues with the diffuse blur. We'll use the coarse oily blender, and we're blending in and we're blending out. We're not getting any fringe. We'll use the distorto. We'll see if we get any fringe. Nope. And just to prove that this isn't some kind of trick, I'm making a brand new layer here. Make it black, exactly the same. And let's just go ahead and blend with the same brushes. Diffuse blur, fringe. Look at all that fringe. Can you see the difference there? White fringe, no white fringe. Let's try the coarse oily blender. Let's see what we get. We get more fringe. You can really see it over here. Now if we do that on our modified layer, same brush strokes, same everything, you can see. And this isn't a trick, this is just a default layer, regular layer. If I change it to anything else, you can see that it works perfectly fine. I'm not doing any crazy manipulation with some video editing program to trick you into thinking that this is not a normal layer. It's just a special combination of things I came up with that makes it work. And it does have a couple limitations, but for the most part, I think it fixes this fringe problem, for me at least. So if you found this information helpful, take a quick second to like this video or share it on YouTube or on Facebook, and that'll make it easier for other digital artists out there to find this information. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for my next video.